The galactic training facility on Kepler 442 hummed with the sound of energy weapons discharging across dozens of firing ranges. Commander Zethkar adjusted his four eyes to focus on the human female who had just entered Range 7. She was small, even by human standards, barely reaching his chest plates. Her dark hair was pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence that made his mandibles click with annoyance. "Another human thinks she can outshoot Calaxian range masters," muttered Sergeant Vexther, his reptilian companion from the neighboring range. "They never learn." The woman approached the registration desk, where junior technician Flimtalk nearly dropped his data pad upon seeing her. Humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Defense Force, having joined only 3 cycles ago. Most species remained skeptical of their combat abilities, considering them soft-bodied and weak compared to the hardened warriors of established military races. "Name?" Flimtalk asked in broken Standard Galactic, his translator struggling with human pronunciation patterns. "Sarah Chen, Terran Defense Corps," she replied calmly, presenting her identification chip. Flimtalk's eyes widened as he scanned the chip. The woman's file showed she had requested access to the Master's Range, the most difficult shooting course in the facility. Only veterans with decades of experience and confirmed kill counts in the thousands were typically permitted access. "There must be mistake," Flimtalk stammered. "This range for elite marksmen only. You are human, yes, perhaps basic range more suitable." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in her brown eyes. "I've been cleared for Master's Range. Check your authorization codes." The technician's claws tapped nervously across his console. Indeed, the authorization was legitimate, bearing the signature of Admiral Korvash himself. Flimtalk had no choice but to comply, though he activated the safety protocols with extra care. If this human injured herself, he would face a disciplinary hearing. Commander Zethkar watched with growing interest as Sarah was fitted with the standard targeting equipment. The Master's Range used quantum-locked energy rifles that fired concentrated plasma bursts at targets that moved in 3 dimensions through a maze of obstacles. The targets themselves were equipped with countermeasures, including energy shields and evasive maneuvers. Even experienced marksmen typically achieved only a 30% hit rate on their first attempt. "Should we inform the medical bay?" asked Sergeant Vexther, genuine concern in his voice. "Humans are fragile. The weapon's kickback alone could break their bones." The rifle Sarah received was a standard-issue K-77 plasma rifle, weighing nearly 60 pounds and designed for species with enhanced muscular density. She lifted it with both hands, testing its weight and balance. Her movements were economical, professional. She'd clearly handled heavy weapons before. The range master, a grizzled Thorian veteran named Graxol, approached with his 6 arms crossed skeptically. His species had dominated galactic marksmanship competitions for 2 centuries, and his own accuracy rating was legendary among military circles. "Human," Graxol's voice rumbled like shifting stone, "this is not a training exercise. These weapons can kill. The targets move faster than your eyes can track. Perhaps you should observe first, learn our techniques." Sarah shouldered the rifle, adjusting the stock to fit her smaller frame. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm here to shoot." The other ranges had grown quiet as words spread about the human attempting the Master's Range. Calaxian snipers, Thorian heavy weapons specialists, and Centaurian assault troops gathered at the observation windows. Some came out of curiosity, others hopping to witness a spectacular failure that would confirm their prejudices about human capabilities. "Range is live in 30 seconds, announced the automated system. "Target pattern, Advanced Evasion Protocol 7, good hunting." The lights dimmed, and the targeting chamber filled with a maze of energy barriers and gravitational fields. Somewhere in that labyrinth, 3 targets would begin their complex dance, moving at speeds that challenged even the most sophisticated tracking systems. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing slow and steady. When she opened them again, something had changed. The casual demeanor was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a predator. "Beginning target run," the system announced. The first target materialized 300 meters away, weaving between obstacles in an irregular pattern. Zethkar leaned forward, expecting to see the human struggle with the weapon's weight and recoil. Instead, she moved with fluid precision, tracking the target's movement with minimal weapon sway. She didn't fire. The second target appeared, following a different flight path that intersected with the first at random intervals. Now two objects moved through the maze, their paths creating a complex web of motion that taxed even veteran marksmen. Still, Sarah held her fire. When the third target materialized, the challenge became nearly impossible. Three objects, each moving independently, each equipped with different defensive measures, created a chaos of motion that made accurate shooting seem futile. The gathered spectators murmured among themselves. Most experienced shooters would have fired multiple shots by now, hoping to score hits through volume rather than precision. But the human remained motionless, weapon steady, watching. "What is she waiting for?" whispered Vexther. That was when Sarah smiled. The smile that crossed Sarah Chen's face was not one of amusement, but of recognition. In the swirling chaos of three targets weaving through the obstacle course, she had seen something that escaped the notice of every veteran marksman watching her. A pattern within the randomness, a mathematical certainty hiding beneath apparent chaos. Commander Zethkar's secondary eyes tracked the targets while his primary pair focused on the human. In his 40 years of military service, he had witnessed countless displays of marksmanship from dozens of species. The Calaxians were naturally gifted with their four-dimensional vision. The Thorians possessed 6 arms that could stabilize weapons in ways other species envied. The Centaurians had reflexes that bordered on precognitive. But humans were supposedly unremarkable in every measurable way. "She's been standing there for 2 full minutes, observed Sergeant Vexther, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously. "The maximum time limit for this course is 5 minutes. At this rate, she'll run out of time before she even fires." The 3 targets continued their elaborate dance through the energy maze. Target 1 maintained a steady velocity, but changed direction every 17 seconds. Target 2 moved in a spiral pattern that brought it near the outer barriers before diving toward the center. Target 3 appeared to move randomly, but Sarah's trained eye had already identified the subtle mathematical progression governing its path. During her years with Terran Defense Corps, Sarah had specialized in what military strategists called chaos mathematics, the ability to find order within seemingly random systems. It was a uniquely human skill that had developed during their species' long history of warfare on a planet where predators, weather, and terrain created ever-changing battlefield conditions. While other species had evolved to excel in specific combat environments, humans had adapted to excel in unpredictability itself. Range Master Graxol shifted impatiently on his 6 legs. "The human appears to have frozen under pressure. This is why we maintain standards. Perhaps we should." His words were cut short as Sarah suddenly moved. Her motion was so fluid it appeared almost casual, but those with enhanced senses could detect the subtle adjustments she made to her stance, the micro-movements of her fingers on the trigger assembly, the way her breathing shifted into a rhythm that synchronized with the plasma rifle's charging cycle. "What is she doing?" whispered Junior Technician Flimtalk, his large eyes reflecting the glow from his monitoring station. Sarah was calculating, not with computers or targeting assistance, but with the human brain's remarkable ability to process multiple variables simultaneously. She tracked the intersecting paths of all 3 targets, factoring in their defensive countermeasures, the energy dissipation rates of the plasma rifle, and the gravitational effects of the maze's field generators. More importantly, she was waiting for convergence. The gathered spectators grew restless. Several Calaxian marksmen began making small wagers about when the human would admit defeat. A group of Thorian soldiers started discussing whether humans should be restricted to basic training weapons. The consensus was forming that this was exactly the kind of embarrassing display they had expected from a species so new to galactic warfare. But Commander Zethkar found himself leaning forward, his combat instincts prickling with recognition. He had felt this sensation before, in the moments before a battle shifted dramatically in an unexpected direction. The human stillness wasn't hesitation, it was the patience of a hunter waiting for the perfect moment. Sarah's breathing slowed to match the rhythm she had detected in the target's movements. Every complex system, no matter how chaotic it appeared, eventually created moments of predictable intersection. The key was recognizing when apparent randomness would briefly align into certainty. Target 1 completed its 17-second cycle and began turning toward the eastern barrier. Target 2 reached the apex of its spiral and started diving toward the maze's center. Target 3, following its hidden mathematical sequence, accelerated toward a position that would bring all three targets into a direct line for exactly 0.7 seconds. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger. The plasma rifle hummed as its charge reached maximum capacity. Around her, the spectators fell silent, sensing that something was about to happen, though none could predict what. Range Master Graxol stopped his packing, his 6 eyes focused entirely on the human who had remained motionless for 3 minutes and 47 seconds. In the observation booth, Admiral Corvash himself materialized, having heard reports about the human attempting the Master's range. The elderly Zephyrian's tentacles writhed with curiosity as he reviewed Sarah's personnel file on a portable display. Her background was impressive by human standards, but unremarkable compared to the elite marksmen who typically used this facility. The convergence point approached. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger as her brain processed the final calculations. The 3 targets would align in their precise formation in exactly 1.2 seconds. The plasma burst would take 0.3 seconds to reach the convergence point. She needed to fire in 0.9 seconds. But the moment required more than mathematical precision. It demanded something that no computer could calculate and no enhanced senses could detect. The intuitive understanding of motion and space that humans had developed through millennia of throwing stones at moving prey, of leading shots with primitive projectile weapons, of adapting to combat situations that changed faster than conscious thought could follow. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The plasma rifle's discharge lit up the range like a miniature star, sending a concentrated burst of energy racing toward the maze at nearly the speed of light. The recoil that would have sent most humans sprawling barely shifted Sarah's stance. Her modified grip and reinforced positioning absorbed the weapon's kickback with mechanical precision. Every eye in the facility tracked the plasma burst as it streaked through the maze, threading between energy barriers and gravitational fields with impossible accuracy. The bolt seemed to home in on a specific point in empty space, as if targeting something that wasn't there. Then the targets moved into convergence. The plasma burst struck Target 3 just as it aligned with Targets 1 and 2. The energy blast punched through the first target's shields, continued through its core systems, and emerged with enough force to penetrate the second target's defenses. The bolt maintained coherence long enough to disable the third target's central processor before finally dissipating against the range's rear barrier. For a moment, absolute silence filled the facility. Then the automated scoring system's voice echoed through the range. 3 confirmed kills, single shot. Time elapsed 4 minutes 12 seconds, new facility record. The silence stretched for exactly 4.7 seconds before chaos erupted throughout the galactic training facility. Alien voices in dozens of languages filled the air as species from across the galaxy tried to process what they had just witnessed. The impossible had occurred in front of hundreds of witnesses, and nobody could explain how. Admiral Corvash's tentacles writhed with such intensity that his aide stepped backward, recognizing the signs of extreme agitation in the elderly Zephyrian. For 60 years, Corvash had overseen military training for the Galactic Defense Force. He had watched the greatest marksmen from every known species attempt the Master's range. The previous record holder was Sniper Prime Kethvar of the Calaxian Elite Guard, who had managed 2 kills with 7 shots after 43 attempts. This human had achieved 3 kills with 1 shot on her first try. Run full diagnostics on all range equipment, Admiral Corvash commanded his aide. Check the targeting systems, verify the plasma rifle's specifications, analyze the blast pattern. Find me an explanation for what we just saw. Meanwhile, Commander Zethkar found himself staring at Sarah Chen with newfound respect tinged with unease. Throughout his military career, he had developed an instinct for recognizing dangerous individuals. The human standing calmly at the firing line, methodically checking her weapon's safety mechanisms, radiated the quiet competence of someone who viewed impossible shots as routine challenges. Range Master Graxol approached Sarah with all 6 of his massive arms spread in the traditional Thorian gesture of acknowledgement. His stone-like features, carved by centuries of warfare, showed genuine bewilderment. Human Sarah Chen, his voice rumbled like distant thunder, in my 90 years overseeing this range, I have never witnessed such precision. How did you predict the convergence point? No computer could calculate those variables fast enough. Sarah finished securing her weapon and turned to face the towering Thorian. I didn't use a computer. Humans have been making shots like that for thousands of years. We just used different weapons. The gathered crowd pressed closer, eager to hear her explanation. Representatives from a dozen species strained to understand how this small, seemingly unremarkable human had accomplished something their finest warriors couldn't match. Different weapons? Asked Sergeant Vexther, his reptilian features twisted in confusion. Projectile weapons, primitive by your standards, but they taught us to think in ways energy weapons don't require. Sarah gestured toward the maze where maintenance drones were already replacing the destroyed targets. When you fire a plasma burst, it travels at near light speed. Point and shoot. But bullets, arrows, spears, they travel slowly enough that you have to calculate where your target will be, not where it is. She paused, nodding the blank stares from her audience. For example, if you're hunting a deer running through a forest, you don't aim at the deer. You aim at where the deer will be when your arrow gets there. You factor in wind speed, arrow drop, the deer's pace and direction, obstacles in its path. Your brain does all those calculations automatically, in fractions of a second, while you're running and breathing hard and trying not to trip over roots. Junior technician Flimtock's translator struggled with several of the concepts Sarah had described. Deer, arrow, these are human technologies. Ancient human technologies. We spent millennia learning to hit moving targets with slow projectiles under changing conditions. It became instinctive. When we finally developed energy weapons, we just applied the same mental processes to faster projectiles. Admiral Corvash descended from the observation booth, his tentacles now moving in patterns that indicated deep contemplation. You speak of instinct, but the mathematics involved in your shot were incredibly complex. The convergence point existed for less than 1 second. Human brains are good at pattern recognition and predictive modeling, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. We evolved on a planet where missing your shot meant starving or becoming something else's dinner. The ones who couldn't make difficult shots didn't survive to reproduce. This explanation created a stir among the assembled aliens. Most species had achieved technological advancement before developing sophisticated ranged weapons. They had learned precision shooting using computer-assisted targeting systems and energy weapons that traveled at predictable velocities. Humans had developed their marksmanship skills using crude projectiles that required complex mental calculations performed under extreme pressure. Commander Zethkar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Your species learned to hunt with primitive weapons, but the targets in our training scenarios move much faster than any planetary prey. Faster, yes, but more predictable. Sarah pointed toward the range controls. Your targets follow programmed patterns even when those patterns seem random. They're designed by computers, so they have mathematical logic underlying their movements. Once you identify the logic, you can predict the convergence points. Range Master Graxel's 6 arms moved in a gesture of grudging admiration. Even if you could predict convergence, the timing required to hit all 3 targets with 1 shot demands precision beyond most species' capabilities. Humans are persistence hunters, Sarah explained. On our home world, we tracked prey for days across changing terrain. We learned to synchronize our breathing, heartbeat, and muscle control with external rhythms. When you spend hours following a wounded animal through a forest, you develop an intuitive sense for timing and patience. The crowd around her had grown to include nearly every instructor and advanced student in the facility. Word was spreading through the base's communication systems, drawing curious personnel from other departments. The human who had achieved the impossible was explaining her success in terms that made it sound almost inevitable. Admiral Corvash studied the data streaming across his portable display. The range sensors had recorded every aspect of Sarah's performance in microscopic detail. Her stance, breathing, muscle tension, eye movements, all showed the kind of precise control typically associated with cybernetic enhancement or genetic modification. Medic Tralvin, the Admiral called to a Calaxian medical officer in the crowd. Scan the human for cybernetic implants or biological modifications. The medic approached with a handheld scanner, its sensors probing Sarah's body for any technological augmentation. After several minutes of detailed scanning, he turned to the Admiral with all 4 eyes wide with surprise. She's completely unmodified, sir. Standard human physiology. No implants, no genetic enhancement, no pharmaceutical aids. Her neural activity shows patterns I've never seen before, incredibly complex parallel processing, but it appears to be natural. Admiral Corvash's tentacles writhed faster as the implications became clear. If one human could achieve this level of performance using nothing but natural abilities and primitive training methods, what could their entire species accomplish with proper equipment and advanced instruction? The Admiral activated his personal communicator with a decision that would reshape galactic military doctrine. Get me the Terran Defense Corps High Command. We need to discuss expanding human recruitment immediately. 3 days after Sarah Chen's record-breaking performance, the Galactic Training Facility buzzed with activity unlike anything in its 100-year history. Representatives from 12 different species had arrived to witness demonstrations of human marksmanship techniques. The shooting ranges, normally reserved for elite military units, now hosted an unprecedented gathering of admirals, generals, and combat specialists from across the galaxy. Sarah found herself at the center of attention she had never sought. Her simple explanation of human hunting instincts had triggered a cascade of interest that reached the highest levels of galactic military command. Now, she stood before a semicircle of the most powerful military leaders in known space, each eager to understand how her species had developed such remarkable combat abilities. "Demonstrate again," requested General Korthak of the Centaurian battle fleet, his multiple arms gesturing toward a newly configured target array. "Our weapons specialists have designed a scenario specifically to test your hunting instincts." The new course was even more complex than the Master's range. 5 targets moved through a 3-dimensional maze filled with energy barriers, gravitational wells, and holographic obstacles designed to confuse targeting sensors. Each target followed a different movement pattern, and their paths intersected at multiple points in seemingly random sequences. What made this scenario particularly challenging was that the targets were programmed with learning algorithms. They adapted their movements based on previous shots, making repeat performances nearly impossible. It was designed to be unsurvivable by any single marksman. Sarah examined the course layout on a tactical display, her eyes tracking the various obstacles and movement patterns. Around her, the assembled military leaders watched with the intensity of scientists observing a critical experiment. "The targets learn from each shot?" she asked, seeking clarification. "Correct," replied Admiral Corvash. "After each weapon discharge, they modify their patterns to avoid similar attack vectors. It forces marksmen to constantly adapt their strategies." This drew a slight smile from Sarah. "On Earth, we call that hunting smart prey." She selected a standard K-77 plasma rifle from the weapons rack, the same model she had used 3 days earlier. The gathered officials murmured among themselves as she performed her routine weapon inspection, noting the casual competence with which she handled the massive firearm. Commander Zethkar had spent the past 3 days studying human military history, trying to understand the context behind Sarah's abilities. What he had discovered disturbed him in ways he was still processing. Humans hadn't just evolved as persistence hunters. They had spent their entire species development locked in constant warfare with each other, their environment, and predators that outmatched them in every physical capability. They had learned to win through intelligence, adaptability, and a willingness to take risks that other species would consider suicidal. "Course is live," announced the range control system. 5 targets, adaptive programming, maximum difficulty setting, good hunting. The maze filled with swirling energy patterns as the targets began their complex dance. Unlike the previous demonstration, these targets moved erratically from the start, their learning algorithms already programmed with data from thousands of previous attempts by other marksmen. Sarah raised the rifle to her shoulder and immediately began tracking the movement patterns. But instead of the patient observation she had shown before, she started moving herself, circling the firing point to observe the targets from different angles. "What is she doing?" whispered General Korthak to his aide. "Standard firing protocol requires maintaining position." The answer became clear as Sarah continued her movement. She wasn't just calculating the target's convergence points. She was actively changing the geometric relationships between herself, the targets, and the obstacles. By altering her position, she was creating new potential firing solutions that the target's learning algorithms hadn't anticipated. It was a fundamentally different approach to marksmanship than any galactic species had developed. Where others sought the perfect shot from an optimal position, humans adapted their position to create opportunities that hadn't existed before. Admiral Corvash watched with growing understanding. She's not playing by the rules we programmed into the system. Humans rarely do, observed Dr. Yelenter, a Zephyrian tactical analyst who had arrived that morning. I've been studying their military history. They have a pattern of succeeding by approaching conflicts from angles their opponents never considered. Sarah continued her movement around the firing point, her rifle tracking multiple targets simultaneously as she built a three-dimensional model of their behavior patterns in her mind. The learning algorithms were adapting to previous shooting attempts, but they had no data for dealing with a marksman who refused to remain stationary. After 2 minutes of observation, she stopped moving and settled into a firing stance. But her position was 15 degrees off the standard firing line, at an angle that seemed to offer no clear shot through the maze's obstacles. From that position, she cannot possibly hit more than one target, analyzed General Korthak's tactical computer. The energy barriers block her line of sight to the others. Sarah's breathing settled into the rhythm that had become familiar to the observers. Her finger moved to the trigger as she tracked a convergence point that existed only from her specific position, and only for a brief moment when the target's adapted movements would create an unexpected alignment. She fired. The plasma burst streaked through the maze at an angle no previous marksman had attempted. It struck the first target, punched through its defenses, and ricocheted off an energy barrier at a precisely calculated angle. The deflected beam hit the second target, ricocheted again, and continued bouncing through the maze in a pattern that seemed to defy physics. By the time the energy finally dissipated, all 5 targets had been destroyed by a single shot that had ricocheted 7 times through the obstacle course. The silence that followed was even more profound than after Sarah's first demonstration. Several of the gathered officials stood with their mouths or equivalent openings agape, their understanding of marksmanship fundamentally challenged. Range Master Graxel's 6 arms hung limp at his sides as he stared at the tactical display showing the shot's impossible trajectory. The ricochet angles, the timing required. No computer could calculate that pattern. Humans have been bouncing projectiles off surfaces to hit targets for thousands of years, Sarah explained matter-of-factly. We call it bank shots. It's a basic technique when you're hunting in caves or forests where you can't get direct lines of sight. Admiral Korvash's tentacles had stopped moving entirely, a sign of deep shock in Zephyrian physiology. You calculated 7 ricochet angles in your head while accounting for target movement and learning adaptations. I didn't calculate them individually. I visualized the pattern and trusted my instincts to find the right firing solution. Sarah secured her weapon and turned to face the assembled group. Human brains are very good at spatial reasoning and predictive modeling. We had to be, or we would have gone extinct long ago. The implications of what they had witnessed were staggering. Humans weren't just capable marksmen. They were operating on principles that no other species had considered. They turned limitations into advantages, adapted tactics in real time, and solved problems through intuitive leaps that bypassed conventional logic. Commander Zethkar stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of sudden realization. Admiral, with your permission, I would like to formally request assignment to the new Human Integration Program. What Human Integration Program? Asked Admiral Korvash. The one we're going to need, Zethkar replied. Because after today, everything we thought we knew about combat doctrine needs to be reconsidered. 6 months after Sarah Chen's demonstrations revolutionized galactic military thinking, the Kepler 442b facility had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. A joint training center where human instructors taught alien soldiers techniques that had never been formally codified in any manual. The changes were visible everywhere. Range 7, where Sarah had first achieved her impossible shot, now bore a plaque commemorating the moment that had shifted military doctrine across 12 star systems. But more importantly, the ranges themselves had been redesigned to accommodate training methods that emphasized movement, adaptation, and unconventional thinking rather than rigid positioning and computer-assisted targeting. Sarah stood before a mixed class of 40 students representing 8 different species. Calaxian snipers with their four-dimensional vision worked alongside Thorian heavy weapons specialists and Centaurian assault troops. Each had requested transfer to the human training program after their governments had witnessed the dramatic improvements in combat effectiveness shown by early graduates. Today we're going to work on what humans call field expedient solutions, Sarah announced, gesturing toward a range that had been configured to look like a ruined city. Computer-generated targeting solutions work perfectly when conditions match your programming, but real combat rarely provides perfect conditions. The students, all veterans with decades of experience, listened with the intense focus that had become standard in these sessions. Initial skepticism about learning from a species so new to galactic warfare had evaporated as human teaching methods produced results that traditional training could never achieve. Commander Zethkar, now serving as liaison between human instructors and the Galactic Defense Force, watched from the observation deck alongside Admiral Korvash. The past 6 months had validated his decision to embrace human integration. Early reports from units with human-trained personnel showed improvement in mission success rates that bordered on the miraculous. The Centaurian Third Fleet reports a 40% increase in combat effectiveness since implementing human tactical adaptations, Zethkar reported, reviewing the latest performance data. The Thorian Defense Corps is requesting immediate expansion of the training program. Admiral Korvash's tentacles moved in patterns indicating deep satisfaction. The elderly Zephyrian had initially been skeptical about investing resources in training programs based on primitive hunting techniques. Now he found himself authorizing the construction of similar facilities throughout galactic space. "What's the secret?" asked Dr. Yelenter, who had become the program's chief tactical analyst. "How did humans develop capabilities that our most advanced species never discovered?" Below them, Sarah was demonstrating something that would have seemed impossible before human integration began. She had blindfolded herself and was navigating the ruined city scenario using only sound and spatial memory, engaging targets that her students couldn't even see. "Necessity," Zethkar replied, his 4 eyes tracking Sarah's movement through the urban maze. "Humans developed these abilities because they had to. Every other species achieved technological advancement that compensated for their limitations. Humans developed beyond their limitations instead." The demonstration continued for another hour, with students attempting to replicate techniques that challenged everything they thought they knew about combat. Moving while shooting, using environmental features to create ricochet shots, engaging multiple targets through a combination of direct fire and calculated deflections. Methods that human children learned as games, but that represented revolutionary concepts to galactic military science. As the session concluded, Sarah gathered her students for the debriefing that had become a crucial part of human training methodology. Unlike traditional galactic education that emphasized memorizing approved techniques, human instruction focused on understanding principles that could be adapted to any situation. "Remember," Sarah told the diverse group of alien warriors, "perfect conditions exist only in training scenarios. Real enemies don't follow movement patterns programmed by your computers. They adapt, they learn, they do unexpected things. Your job is to be more adaptive, learn faster, and do things so unexpected that they can't prepare for them." A young Calaxian sniper raised one of her 4 hands. "Instructor Chen, how do we learn to think like humans? Our minds don't work the same way yours do." "You don't need to think like humans," Sarah replied with the patient tone that had made her one of the program's most requested instructors. "You need to think like yourselves, but without the limitations you've been taught to accept. Humans aren't special because we're smarter or stronger. We're effective because we've never learned to accept that something is impossible." This philosophy had become the cornerstone of human-influenced military doctrine throughout the galaxy. Species that had spent millennia perfecting techniques within carefully defined parameters were learning to question those parameters themselves. After the students dispersed, Sarah made her way to the observation deck, where Admiral Korvash waited with news that would reshape her life once again. "The Galactic Council has approved the establishment of a new military academy," the Admiral announced, his tentacles writhing with excitement. "It will be dedicated entirely to developing and teaching adaptive combat techniques. They want you to serve as the Academy's first director of human integration." Sarah considered the offer while looking out at the ranges where her impromptu demonstration 6 months ago had started a revolution. Students from dozens of species were now practicing techniques that emphasized creativity over conformity, adaptation over rigid doctrine, and intuitive problem-solving over computer-assisted targeting. "Will I still be able to teach?" she asked. "The position would require it," Admiral Corvash assured her. "The Academy's mission is to train instructors who will return to their home worlds and spread these methods throughout galactic military forces. We need someone who understands both the techniques and the philosophy behind them." Through the observation windows, Sarah could see maintenance crews preparing the ranges for evening sessions. Night combat training had been another human contribution. Most galactic species had relied so heavily on technological assistance that they had never learned to fight effectively in reduced visibility conditions. "Human integration has been successful beyond our most optimistic projections," Commander Zethkar added. "But it's only the beginning. The methods you've taught us suggest that human military philosophy has applications far beyond individual marksmanship." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the full scope of what was being offered. The opportunity to share human adaptability with an entire galaxy, to teach species that had achieved wonders through technology that there were still discoveries to be made through intuition, creativity, and the willingness to attempt the impossible. "I accept," she said simply. As she spoke, somewhere in the distance, a student successfully completed their first ricochet shot, and the sound of celebration echoed across the facility. It was a small victory, but it represented something larger, the moment when another warrior learned to see past the boundaries they had been taught to accept. The revolution that had started with 3 impossible shots from one human had become a transformation that would reshape how an entire galaxy approached the art of war. And Sarah Chen, who had only wanted to qualify for advanced training, found herself at the center of changes that would echo across the stars for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't technology or superior firepower that gave humans their edge in galactic warfare. It was something far more fundamental, the refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible, combined with the imagination to find solutions that nobody else had thought to attempt. The galaxy would never be the same,